Thank you for joining us for this week's session of Fridays on the Farm. Today we're going to start talking about sprayer calibration and why calibration is so important to your operation. As people come into the office and they want recommendations on how much chemical to put in their tank, there's a couple things we need to know before I can actually give that recommendation. I need to know what's the recommended rate of the pesticide per acre, and to figure out how much to actually put in your tank, we need to know how fast you're driving in miles per hour, and we need to know the gallons per minute that your tank's putting out. And it's really important that we don't take shortcuts and we find that number correctly. Some folks wonder why that's important. Can we just kind of guesstimate and get close? And don't you know what most people put out? Well, we want to know how much your tank is putting out at your place and how fast you're driving. Some chemicals we put out at as little to an ounce to the acre. I want you to think about a tablespoon of salt. Could you spread that across a football field, let alone spread it evenly? That would be the equivalent of trying to put out an ounce to the acre of chemical without calibrating your sprayer first. So we want to take the time on the front end to make sure things are calibrated correctly. We want to make sure your sprayer's in working order. Have you checked your hoses? Have you checked your nozzles? Have you checked your pump? Make sure all that's working in your favor so that when you get ready to spray, you're ready and you're getting the most bang for your buck. When you look at the equipment you're going to use for spraying, it's important that you've got the equipment that fits your situation. There's not a one size fits all. Are you spraying something like thistle that you can use a spot sprayer on the back of your side by side or four wheeler and just spot spray where you need to? Have you got a smaller set of acreage where you can have a small size boom sprayer that goes on the back of a tractor? These could even be pulled behind a side by side if that's an option for you. Or do you need a larger setup? Find what works for you. And if you're having trouble deciding what size or where you should start, don't be afraid to give us a call and we can help find the equipment that works best for you. You can have cheap operations that get the job done, or you can get as fancy as you want to. That's where you've got to figure out what works for you. Another question that I get asked a lot when it comes to equipment is, do you want a cluster sprayer versus a boom sprayer? Most of the time, for better coverage, I'm going to always suggest a boom sprayer. This is more even. It's easier to calibrate. You know what you're putting out better. And most of the time, it's going to be our go-to option. There are a few places that I've heard, especially if you get over in hill country, or if you've got a lot of ravines or creek beds that you're going in and out of, that sometimes those booms can be kind of cumbersome to get around, especially without worrying about going up and down and taking the ends off your boom. In those kinds of situations, a cluster nozzle might be better. You've also got to remember that with a cluster nozzle, your coverage won't be as even. So you've got to have some more overlap so that you're not streaking your field. So gallons per acre is one of the things that we have to know before we can calibrate your sprayer. We've got to know how much your sprayer is putting out over how much area. And so to get gallons per acre, we've got to know how fast you're driving, which is your equipment speed. We've got to know your nozzle spacing in inches, or if you've got a cluster nozzle, this is your effective swath width that we'll talk about a little bit more in just a second. And we've got to know the gallons per minute that your tank's actually putting out. So for equipment speed, this seems pretty self-explanatory. If your tractor has a speedometer that works really well, great. We can know exactly, and it's a quick answer. But a lot of people don't have equipment that's got a speedometer that works very well, but you still have options too. Some people have GPS units that they use when they're spraying. This is going to tell you how fast you're driving, and is a great option. If you don't want to have that kind of investment in your operation, there is an app you can get for your phone. It's called Speedometer. This is what it looks like when it pops up on your phone. It is the most simple to use, easy, free app that I have on my phone, and I strongly recommend it any day of the week. We have checked it against some cars, and it is pretty accurate. And when you download the app, this is the only thing that it does. It's one big number that's easy enough for everybody to read. If I come out to your place to help you calibrate speed, I'm going to hand you this, tell you to drive in whichever gear that you're more comfortable driving in, and we can figure it out pretty quickly. The other option, if you don't want to use an app or you don't want to use a GPS, but we still need to know how fast you're driving, is we can actually calibrate your speed and get it in miles per hour. We're going to use a similar terrain as what's in your pasture. You don't want to go from having a hilly, bumpy, rough pasture and calibrate your speed on pavement. It's important that we do something that's similar. That way your driving conditions will be about the same. You want to fill your tank about half full of water. That'll also impact how fast you're driving. And then it's also important that when you set up your course, for example, here it's flagged at 1 and 2, you want to be going at speed when you cross the first flag. Don't wait till the flag to start, because you're not starting and stopping everywhere across your field. Be at speed when you cross the first flag. Pick whichever point in your tractor you want to use as that, whether that's the spears on the front of your tractor or the sprayer on the back. Start your speed there. Drive at that constant speed till you get to your endpoint flag. And those are going to be about 100 feet apart. And when that same point of your tractor crosses, we stop the timer. You've got 100 feet. That 60 and 88 are both constants. And then you take the time that it took to drive that distance. We'll do the equation, and that'll give you miles per hour. The first things we need to do is make sure our nozzles are spaced evenly. We want to have an even coverage when we spray, so we want to make sure our nozzles are even on the front end. Take your measuring tape, and you're just going to start at one end. Get your first measurement, and work your way down, checking each one to make sure that they're all even. And if for some reason you get to one that's not, this is a good time to fix that and correct it before we get very much farther. With boomless sprayers, we're obviously not measuring the nozzle spacing to make sure it's accurate, but we want to get the effective swath width. And notice, effective width isn't how far it can spray in either direction. We're going to set this up on some kind of pavement that we can see the area that gets wet, whether that's dirt or pavement, somewhere that we can accurately see how much water is actually getting on the ground. And we'll measure the total swath width, and then we'll cut it down, depending on the nozzle size, but most of the time we take about 70% of the area on the ground that's wet to get your effective swath width. This is also important to keep in mind when you're spraying, because you'll need to overlap on those edges to make sure that you're still getting good coverage and not leaving streaks down the middle. Now it's time to catch. Catching to get your gallons per minute is pretty simple. The biggest thing is make sure that your system is built pressure, it's putting out evenly, you've checked across all your boom nozzles, they all look pretty even. If I come out and help you check, I'm using that handy device that's on the right. We'll go through and we'll check about every other boom nozzle and make sure they're all putting out pretty even. It's easy enough. I stick it under your nozzle, and in 15 seconds, I can tell you your gallons per minute. If you want to do it yourself, it's still pretty simple. Get your measuring cup, put it under your nozzle, catch for that 1 minute, and that way you know how much it's putting out. Once you've caught, you're going to convert that to gallons per minute, depending on what unit it is you're catching with. And then some people who have cluster nozzles tell me it's not that easy, because obviously you can't just stick a measuring cup under a cluster nozzle and expect to catch everything. But I would bet that everybody's got a gallon-sized jug or 2-liter bottle somewhere floating around in the back of their truck. All you have to do is take that gallon-sized jug, cut a hole in the center of it, and then put it upside down and slide it over that cluster nozzle where the cluster nozzle is on the inside of it. Turn your sprayer on, let it build pressure just like we do with our boom nozzles, and then stick your bucket under it to catch just like we do with a boom nozzle. This way we're still catching all the water that cluster nozzle is putting out, and we're not all getting soaked in the process. Now it's time to do a little bit of math. And this is where, if you have trouble and you want me to come out and help you do all this, I'm more than happy to. But we need to find gallons per acre. So let's start with how fast we're driving, which is 4 miles an hour for this example. We measured our boom nozzles and they were 20 inches apart. Once we caught, we figured out we were putting out 0.2 gallons per minute. This equation does not change regardless of whether you're using a boom sprayer or a cluster nozzle, either way. You'll plug in our numbers. We had 0.2 gallons per minute, that 5940 is a constant. How fast we were driving, which was 4 miles an hour, and 20 inches, that was our width and nozzle spacing. By the time you do all that math, you get 15 gallons per acre. Once we have gallons per acre, then we can talk about how much to mix in your tank. Another option, if you're techie, don't be afraid to use apps on your phone. This app is personally one of my favorites. It's called Calibrate. If you look it up in the App Store, it's called Calibrate My Sprayer. It's put out by Clemson University, and it's extremely simple to use. When you open this app up on your smartphone or device, it's really simple to use. All you have to do is put in your nozzle spacing, which we know from the previous example was 20 inches. You put in your speed. When you click on the speed, you can even select miles per hour, make sure it's on the right unit. You can put your time caught in seconds. And this is also helpful if you're only catching for like 30 seconds and you want to put in that number, you can even adjust it there. And then you add in how much you caught. You can figure this in gallons or liters. It takes some of that conversion step out of the process, which kind of helps us not mess up our math as much. And then it gives us our gallons per acre that simply. The other thing that I really like is some people's pastures might not all be the same. Maybe you've got one field you can drive 5 miles an hour in. Maybe you've got one field you can only drive 3 miles per hour in. You can come up here and just change your speed and get your gallons per acre to pop out that quickly and not have to go through all the math steps again. So if you've got questions or you want to play with this a little bit or you start playing with it and you're not sure, don't hesitate to give me a call and we can work through it. Then there's the ounce method. This is also a good option if you're doing it yourself. We've got cards here at the office that, especially if you come take a PAT class, you'll automatically get one, or if you need one, just give us a holler. This method takes some of the math out of the equation for you. The first thing you do is figure out what's your nozzle spacing on your sprayer. For example, the 20-inch sprayer that we talked about earlier, you'd have a course length of 204 feet. You'll set that course up. Think about when we talked about setting your course up for speed. You also want to use similar terrain, have that tank halfway full, be going at speed when you pass the first flag, and don't start slowing down until you pass your end flag. Make sure you're flagging at the same point of your tractor when you cross there. And however long it takes you to drive that course, that's how long you're going to catch. The amount of water you catch in that time period in ounces is the equivalent to your gallons per acre. So this is an easy method that takes some of the math out, and some people really like it over doing the equation. There is a same setup if you've got a boomless sprayer. And honestly, if I come out to help you and you've got a cluster nozzle, this is the method that I like to use a little bit better. We'll measure your effective swath width. Again, you're thinking about 70%. Pick out the length of your course. You'll drive that course. We'll catch, and we'll multiply the gallons we caught times 10 to get your gallons per acre if you've got a cluster nozzle. So once we know the gallons per acre that your tank's actually putting out, then we can go through and figure out how much to actually mix in your tank. So the acres that your tank can cover is going to be how many gallons your tank can hold versus the gallons per acre that we calculated when we calibrated. So if we want to think about product in the tank, we need to know how many acres that are in that tank, and then what's the recommended rate of the chemical. So for example, we calibrated your tank to be 15 gallons per acre, and we know that you have a 150 gallon tank. So the first thing we're going to do is take 150 gallons and divide it by that 15 gallons per acre, which gives us 10 acres. That's pretty simple math. And now let's say the recommended rate of your chemical was 2 quarts per acre. If we know that your 150 gallon tank can cover 10 acres, then 10 acres times 2 quarts per acre gives us 20 quarts, which is how much to actually mix in the tank. This is why it's important that we have all the pieces of the puzzle before I can give you that actual number to mix in your tank. If I come out and help you calibrate, we've got all this math on paper. You're going to tell me what we're trying to control. We'll talk about the recommended rates, and I'll actually give you a copy of where you calibrated, what your gallons per tank was, and a recommendation for everything you're wanting to do. That way you've got it for your records. If you need help, don't hesitate to reach out and call the office. We do these farm visits all the time, and I'm always more than happy to help. We also have our MP44 book. That's a great resource. When you ask me for recommended rates, this is always my go-to. We have free copies for everybody. Just swing by and get you a new one for 2021. Now that we know how fast you're driving, we know how much your tank's putting out, we know the recommended rate, we figured out how much to actually mix in your tank for your operation, you're ready to go. If you ever have trouble with this process, or you've got questions, or you just want somebody to help you go through it for the first time, don't hesitate to give me a call. We love to come out for farm visits. We do this a lot this time of year. Just give us a call at the office. Thank you for joining us for this week's session of Fridays on the Farm. We'll see you next Friday.